We are back live, coming to you from the Parliament building in downtown Castries for the second day of the House of Assembly proceedings. Shortly, we'll be seeing the entrance of the Speaker of the House, and thereafter we will have prayers, announcements by the Speaker of the House, as well as statements by ministers. The motions being forwarded in the Honorable House today included the authorization that the Minister of Finance is seeking for an amount to borrow an amount of US 30 million from the CDB, that is the Caribbean Development Bank, consisting of a special funds resources portion in the amount of $10,800,000 US and an ordinary capital resources portion in the amount of $19,200,000 US dollars for the purpose of financing the implementation of policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis and achieving fiscal stability. And just to let you know that the 30 million US dollar combination loan from the CDB is to meet the budgetary shortfall, given that government revenue has fallen by over 60%. It is also being done to meet the increased costs in the health sector as a result of COVID-19. Also, it will be going towards supporting households at multiple levels that are affected by unemployment due to COVID-19, as well as micro and macro initiatives to build back the economy. We also have another motion being forwarded, the Parliament seeking to revoke the Finance Administration Act resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister for Finance to guarantee borrowing by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority (SLASPA) from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited to finance the Uranora International Airport redevelopment project, published as statutory instrument number 124 of 2019. We also have bills to be laid, the Public Finance Management Bill, the first reading, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill, and these two bills will be forwarded by the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, Honorable Alan Chasney. The Public Finance Management Bill is not new, as it was presented to Parliament in 2017, and since then it has been reviewed by both the public and private sector stakeholders. We also have bills being laid by the Minister for Tourism, Information and Broadcasting, Culture and the Creative Industries, and these are the St. Lucia Tourism Authority Amendment Bill and the Tourism Levy Bill. These are all coming to their first reading in the Honorable House today. Do stay tuned. If you're just joining us, a special good morning to you. We are on standby for the commencement of the sitting of the House of Assembly, the resumption of proceedings from yesterday into today, Wednesday, November 11th, 2020. We are standing by for the entrance of the Speaker of the House. We have two motions to be forwarded in the Honorable House today. The first is seeking authorization from the Parliament from the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $13 million from the CDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, consisting of a special funds resources portion in the amount of US $10,800,000 and an ordinary capital resources portion in the amount of $19,200,000 US dollars for the purpose of financing the implementation of policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response and achieving fiscal stability. And the $13 million US dollar loan from the CDB, that is the total. It is being sought to meet the budgetary shortfall, given that government revenue has fallen by over 60%, and it is also needed to meet increased costs in the health sector as a result of the pandemic. Also, it will be going towards supporting households at multiple levels that are affected by unemployment due to COVID-19, as well as micro and macro initiatives to build back the economy. So that's the first motion being forwarded in the Honorable House this morning, pitched by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. We'll also see Parliament tabling the motion to revoke the Finance Administrative Act. Resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister for Finance to guarantee borrowing by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority (SLASPA) from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited to finance the Uranor International Airport Redevelopment Project, published as Statutory Instrument number 124 of 2019. There are also bills to be laid in the Honourable House by the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, as well as the Minister for Tourism, Information and Broadcasting, Culture and the Creative Industries. The Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Honourable Alan Chasney, will be tabling the Public Finance Management Bill. That's the first reading, and all of the bills, by the way, are having their first reading today. Also, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill, being tabled by the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. The Minister for Tourism, Information and Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries will be tabling the St. Lucia Tourism Authority Amendment Bill and the Tourism Levy Bill. And just to go back to the Public Finance Management Bill, it is not new. It was presented in Parliament back in 2017, and since then it has been reviewed by both public and private sector stakeholders. The Public Finance Management Bill sets rules and processes that will direct government in mobilizing and spending funds. Please take note, this is the agenda set for the sitting of the House of Assembly for today, Wednesday, the 11th of November, 2020. Taking a look back at yesterday's sitting of the House of Assembly, we saw the details of all expenditure that has been undertaken to procure goods and services under the state of emergency was provided to the representatives by Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, Honorable Alan Chasney, on Tuesday, that's yesterday, the 10th of November 2020. The Prime Minister explained that the detailed report was part of the government's efforts to ensure full transparency and public accountability, as the presentation provided justification for the procurement activities pertaining to the COVID-19 national response. The Prime Minister and Minister for Finance explained that while the waiver for the application of any rule of law governing procurement was never utilized, and no such order was issued by the Minister for Finance, the report presents the data compiled on the procurement of goods and services for COVID-19 during the state of emergency, which was declared on March 23, 2020. The principal factors the Prime Minister explained that determined the selection of the suppliers of goods and services were the ability of the suppliers to deliver the goods in the requisite short time, the existing relationships with suppliers, and the suppliers' willingness to accept more flexible payment arrangements and extend more favorable credit terms at minimal cost. So that's a look back at the proceedings from yesterday. The Honorable Prime Minister providing details of all expenditure undertaken to procure goods and services under the state of emergency. And speaking of which, in the set of the pandemic and the Ministry of Health's efforts at containing the COVID-19 virus here on Ireland, the country has registered its first fatalities associated with COVID-19 happening yesterday. We now stand by for the entrance of the Speaker of the House.
Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thy unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and assets within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all forevermore. Honorable members, it is with sadness that I must inform the House and ask you to join me in extending condolences to the family of Wilkinson Larcher, who passed away yesterday. I know some of you may know the family personally, and I do hope that you will take the opportunity in this time to reach out to the family and to any other persons who may so pass. I have also received word from two honorable members, the member for Grosley and the member for Viewfort North, who may not be with us today. Honorable members, when the House rose, the question was that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $50 million from the Caribbean Development Bank, consisting of a special fund resources portion in the amount of US $10,800,000 and an ordinary capital resources portion in the amount of US $19,200,000 for the purpose of financing the implementation of the policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response and achieving fiscal stability. Be it further resolved that A, in the case of the special funds resources portion, 1, the loan is repayable in 80 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on A, the first due date after the expiration of 5 years following the date of the loan agreement, or B, a later due date specified in writing by the Caribbean Development Bank. 2, interest is payable quarterly at the rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the special funds resources portion withdrawn and outstanding. B, in the case of the ordinary capital resources portion, 1, the loan is repayable in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on A, the first due date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or B, a later due date specified in writing by the Caribbean Development Bank. 2, interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 4.1% per annum on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion withdrawn and outstanding. 3, a commitment charge, A, is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion unwithdrawn. B, accrues from the 60th day following the date of the loan agreement. Member for Library.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you correctly reminded this August Assembly, when the House last rose, we were debating the resolution to borrow US $30 million from the Caribbean Development Bank designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response and achieving fiscal stability. Mr. Speaker, after my colleagues addressed themselves very seriously to the business of the people, members opposite yesterday transformed the debate into a UWP William Peter Boulevard National Public Meeting. I will not blame the layout of the chamber, Mr. Speaker, for that. Mr. Speaker, maybe because the chamber is in close proximity to the William Peter Boulevard that they felt that's where they were. Using the logic, Mr. Speaker, since the chamber is located on Library Street, it is only fitting that the floor be given to the member for Library, the instrument of the wishes of the people of the Library Auger constituency, to make a contribution that befits the moment. However, Mr. Speaker, I give you the solemn undertaking that I shall not utilize my time on the floor to engage in politics and to respond to issues that are not even of marginal relevance to the merits of this debate, but to return the debate to what it was prior to the temporary diversion we experienced with the members opposite. Mr. Speaker, it is not my intention, as I indicated, to refute many of the allegations that have been destroyed by self-combustion. However, as I enter upon the debate, for the sake of the historical record, I shall set the record straight, especially issues that are relevant to the context of this debate. One, putting well-being at the center of public policies and moving towards stronger social protection systems. Two, mobilizing resources to build resilience and finance inclusive development. And three, defining a sustainable development strategy where all actors are involved. Mr. Speaker, this is the construct for the moment. As we come together as a nation, come together as a region, and as a global community to combat the deadly coronavirus pandemic. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I can say without any fear of contradiction that we on this side, every time we are in government, we implement policies to benefit the people of this country, and the people have always been first in everything that we do. We always place people at the center of development, which is what is required at this juncture in time. And Mr. Speaker, just by way of example, we look at our healthcare system. It was the St. Lucia Labour Party administration that implemented, planned, designed the new National Hospital. It was this opposition in government that constructed the new wellness center, Mr. Speaker. It was this opposition when in government that rehabilitated health centers all over the island to ensure we improve the health infrastructure to deal with the pressing but legitimate needs of the people of this country, notwithstanding the fact that we understand that we are small, vulnerable economies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in fact, we had made progress to the extent, and I wish to refer to a World Bank document, A Time to Choose, Caribbean Development in the 21st Century, April 12, 2005 document. On page 115, it states, and I quote, "The policy stance towards medical tourism varied both between countries and within countries." It continued on page 16. "In general, the private sector in both countries felt that medical tourism was an insufficiently exploited area and was interested in increased trade in health and health-related services. The government of St. Lucia was interested in exploring trade in health in a strategic manner." And there's a table 5.5 on page 116, and it articulated what St. Lucia was already planning. We're advancing to entering. Talk about spa, wellness, and healthy lifestyle. We have been in this. Alternative and complementary medicine, medical treatment, and then it listed elective surgery, oncology, orthopedics, cardiology, plastic or cosmetic surgery, eye surgery, renal dialysis, recuperation. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the list went on and on, unquote. Mr. Speaker, the new mental wellness center was constructed because of our concern for people in this country. We all know poor people are more vulnerable to drug use and abuse. Poor families, poor environment. They use poor quality drugs. And if you visit the wellness center, you'll realize that a number of those persons were vulnerable. And so we put in place programs to benefit people. We established PRF, and there is also a link between education and drug use and abuse. If people are well educated, if the government sets the tone and the environment to give people alternatives, their development will be much better. And it was this Labour Party that placed at the center of development to provide support for children from poor homes, to provide them with books and supplies, fees and uniforms. Because the members opposite, they cannot recall, either conveniently or otherwise, that during the time children from poor homes used to go to school, they were ridiculed because of the type of uniforms that they had. Chichit bui, all kinds of things, mongoose, jari, all sorts of things happened to them. The Labour Party, by ensuring that those persons have access, like everybody else, provided them with the basic facilities so that they can enter a classroom without being bullied, without being ridiculed, without their self-esteem being impacted negatively, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order, if I may, with your permission. I don't want to object to, I don't want to disrupt the presentation of the honourable member. But Mr. Speaker, the point of order I would like to submit is the section in the standing orders that speaks to the fact that we need to contain our debate or confine it to the subject matter that's being debated. And I know that we've all been allowed latitude, but the member is in about 15 minutes into his presentation and we haven't heard anything about the bill that's before us. I think members on this side are excited to hear his thoughts.
Mr. Speaker, certainly I'm very happy, Mr. Speaker, that I'm allowed to resume normal navigation because I am on the center line of the debate. You all went all over the place yesterday, speaking about things that are completely irrelevant. And it shows that you all have no respect for people. And this is why you cannot make the link. Despite the fact that I spoke about the three things that matter in the context of the borrowing, you fail to make the link between what I am talking about and what we are debating. Because what we are debating now is for us to return this country to the point where our emphasis is on the people of this country, to support the most vulnerable, Mr. Speaker, and to ensure that we return this country to normalcy by providing support for sectors that are badly impacted by COVID-19. But you see, members opposite, with scant regard for people, scant regard, cannot understand why I am even commencing my important discourse on this important resolution by talking about people, because their emphasis have been on horses, and so they cannot understand why putting people first is in sharp contrast to the posture assumed that instead of putting horses first, we are going to put people first, Mr. Speaker. That is the whole idea of dealing with this matter in the manner in which we are navigating the current moment. Mr. Speaker, having established clearly that our emphasis is the people of this country, whether the vulnerable sector, the business community, or the hotel sector, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, as I continue to navigate this very important resolution, I want to just indicate that these funds are necessary for the implementation of policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 response and achieving fiscal stability. Mr. Speaker, I must say I am confused. The Minister for Finance is borrowing more money and thereby increasing our public debt, and this is supposed to achieve fiscal stability. Mr. Speaker, has the Minister for Finance found an elixir, some concoction which allows the government to borrow indefinitely, just borrow on, which he has been doing recently, and achieve fiscal stability? Mr. Speaker, we no longer live in a world where such sophistry works anymore. And I am, Mr. Speaker, calling on the Minister for Finance to explain such oxymoronic language. Mr. Speaker, I would like the Minister for Finance to inform this Honorable House of the policy initiatives that this loan is going to finance to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 response and achieve fiscal stability. I noticed, Mr. Speaker, that there are two bills, and I think the Prime Minister alluded to it yesterday, that there are two bills requiring the government to deal with some pressing matters. The Public Finance Management Bill and the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendments. Mr. Speaker, obviously, when you examine the content, you'll realize why it is there at this particular moment in time. Because people are getting nervous in the international community where St. Lucia is concerned, its level of borrowing and its level of vulnerability. But we'll come to that momentarily, Mr. Speaker. It is a question that I'm asking. It appears that the Minister for Finance, he said we're going to return in 2 weeks' time to deal with the matter, which of course, if it was something else, it would have been dealt with at this sitting of Parliament. We would come here and we want that bill to go through all, but certainly there are certain safeguards there that probably is not as appealing to the Prime Minister for the word urgency to come in, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to repeat that the Minister for Finance needs to state categorically the policy initiatives that this loan will finance that will create fiscal stability. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because this loan will exacerbate our already precarious debt situation and accelerate the unsustainable debt path that this government has placed our economy on. Mr. Speaker, I have repeatedly asked the Minister for Finance to report to this Honorable House on the state of the economy and specifically the state of the government's finances and on the budget. I say this for a number of reasons, Mr. Speaker. The first is the Minister for Finance presented his budget on June 23rd this year. He says it was delayed because he had to incorporate the impact of COVID-19. That is another story, Mr. Speaker, which I shall discuss later on in my presentation. Mr. Speaker, no sooner had the Minister for Finance presented his budget that CARICRIS, the credit ratings agency, downgraded St. Lucia's credit rating from BBB to BBB minus on July 15th. Now, Mr. Speaker, BBB minus is the lowest investment grade rating. After BBB minus, I believe the next rating is BB plus, which is sub-investment grade. This downgrading happened, Mr. Speaker, less than a month after the Minister for Finance presented his budget and was boasting that the debt to GDP ratio was recorded at 59.6 and being below the prudential limit ratio of 60%. But, Mr. Speaker, the window dressing that was applied to the rebasing of the GDP to bring the debt to GDP ratio down will not fool CARICRIS. And needless to say, Mr. Speaker, the members on this side of the House. Since then, Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance has presented a number of resolutions to this House, which were not included in this budget for 2020-2021, further exacerbating the deficit and increasing our long-term debt. While the Minister for Finance has not seen it fit to inform this Honorable House on the state of the economy and the public finances of this country, the Department of Finance made a presentation to the Chamber of Commerce in which some startling revelations were made, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Finance revealed that the GDP was projected to decline by 26% in 2020, and even more shockingly, Mr. Speaker, government revenue plunged by 46%. The public debt, which was recorded at 3.4 billion, had parachuted to 3.6 billion. And the most alarming statistic of all, Mr. Speaker, was that the debt to GDP ratio will exceed 90% by the end of March 31st, 2021. Mr. Speaker, these numbers speak for themselves, and Mr. Speaker, clearly show an economy in crisis and in danger of becoming a failed state. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia finds itself in uncharted territory, and it appears that we are knocking on the IMF door. To compound this situation, Mr. Speaker, the government has engaged on a spending spree, seeking to spend itself out of the crisis. Fiscal slippages to spend itself out of the crisis, but there are outer limits beyond which the government will not go. The government has engaged in a number of design finance construct of DFCs with contractors to build roads. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, the government has taken credit to build these roads. As it is said, Mr. Speaker, we are broke. But when you take credit, Mr. Speaker, you have to pay back. You have to pay back what you owe. In other words, payback is soon, Mr. Speaker. It is a fact, Mr. Speaker, that it will take a number of years for the economy to fully recover. With revenues forecast to be low, the only way we will be able to pay for these roads, Mr. Speaker, is borrowing and more borrowing, increasing our debt even further. Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves in a vicious spiral of increased deficits and debt, which will only be stopped when financial institutions are no longer willing to lend us. It is inevitable, Mr. Speaker, that our credit rating will be downgraded again by CARICRIS to possibly junk bond status. Remember, our debt to GDP has moved from 59.6% to over 90%. However, Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia will not be fooled by this government strategy of building roads, and more roads. The people are suffering, Mr. Speaker, and they cannot eat roads all the time. The Bible says, man cannot live by bread alone. You remember, prior to COVID, in an effort to ensure that we expose our students to a new environment of technology, we're giving the laptops. They stopped it. They were busy at people's homes, munbagamaje laptop. And today, we need those machines. And when people come to this chamber and advocate on behalf of the vulnerable in this country, they laugh. But they want you to speak on a motion about borrowing to respond to the challenges of COVID-19. And responding to it means that you must touch the lives of people. You must deal with those that are falling into poverty after COVID, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate must be at an astronomical level. But we have not seen any data from the statistics department. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that we are on an unsustainable debt path, and the government needs to come clean and present a complete report card on the state of the economy and public finances. And as I prepare to close, Mr. Speaker, I just wish to indicate to this Honorable House that even Barbados, with an IMF program, in Barbados today, the Prime Minister of Barbados in responding to the ban on international travel in the UK, the #1 source market for tourists, indicated we have an arrangement in place, not for 1 or 2 months, but for 24 months, to support the wages of the entire tourism sector, should persons want it, said the Prime Minister of Barbados. But here, Mr. Speaker, the emphasis of this government is prioritizing capital projects to provide stimulus to their friends, family and foreigners, otherwise known as the FFF empire. This, Mr. Speaker, is heartless, unconscionable and unacceptable. And it is a repulsive betrayal of the people who were promised a stimulus but have been sucking salt and gasping for air under this uncaring administration. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, every country in the Caribbean is putting in place substantial stimulus packages for various sectors of their citizenry, from farmers to tourism workers, minibus operators, self-employed people like barbers, hairdressers, taxi operators, bar owners, food establishments, etc., but not the government of St. Lucia. To make matters worse, Mr. Speaker, this government is not directing donor and loan funds in the areas requiring most urgent assistance, like income support and family and social stabilization. Mr. Speaker, this government is effectively and deliberately neglecting the people's most basic needs and deflecting funds intended for their own politics. So instead of using the limited funds available to give the people of St. Lucia the much needed stimulus, you shamelessly chose to engage in election spending, charging people $1.50 on every gallon of gas, and up to now they cannot enjoy the roads. These current construction projects are election projects, not stimulus projects. They will provide no employment or economic opportunities for the majority of St. Lucians who have lost their jobs through COVID-19 and are confronted with the anxiety and brutal reality of impending social and economic collapse at the individual and family levels. So instead of allocating state resources to legitimate expenditure, like police equipment and of course other support to other sectors, the government engages in fundraising activities with their friends to take care of matters that the fiscal framework should be dealing with, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reaction of members opposite clearly indicate their thinking where the people of this country is concerned. But I do not have to engage in any political debate with members opposite. The people of this country, the court of public opinion, has already made a determination as to who care and who do not care about their plight and well-being. They know, Mr. Speaker, and therefore there is no need for me to refute the political arguments of members opposite, because all those arguments have been destroyed by self-combustion. But Mr. Speaker, we are going to come to this House and speak frankly and boldly regarding what is happening in the country, and to, of course, give the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, member for Microsoft, the benefit of our perspectives. And at all times, the member for Library will always come to this chamber and insist that our debates must be a survey of contending views and ideas. So, Mr. Speaker, I await the Prime Minister's explanation for what projects are going to be under this borrowing, how he's going to strategize to move forward, especially with the various sectors that are needed at this time. Because government alone will never be able to pull through. But we require every sector to cooperate under their respective mandates to ensure that we continue to combat the challenges of COVID-19. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Suffolk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to join you in extending condolences to the family of Mr. Wilkie Latcher and also to the Bar Association of St. Lucia, wishing them God's richest blessings and mercies at this difficult time. I also would like to extend condolences to the family of the gentleman, the citizen, who passed away yesterday as a result of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. And this, Mr. Speaker, tells us how serious this COVID situation, this COVID pandemic, this virus is in St. Lucia. And I take this time to call on all St. Lucians to adhere as much as possible to the measures, the protocols that have been put in place to help control the spread of this dreadful virus in this country. I particularly call on my people of Soufrière-Font-Saint-Jacques, Mr. Speaker, to as much as possible wear their mask in public, practice washing their hands with soap and water as much as possible, or using hand sanitizers, and also avoiding mass crowd events. Because one life lost is too many, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, I implore upon everyone to adhere to the protocols and the measures put in place to combat the fight against COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning in support of the motion presented by the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, a member from Mikud South, in authorizing the borrowing of US $30 million for policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response and achieving fiscal stability. Mr. Speaker, as we are all aware, St. Lucia and the entire world is in a medical crisis. And this medical crisis have left an economic crisis. And it is even worse for us as a small island developing state, vulnerable to many external shocks. And this medical crisis, Mr. Speaker, have basically shattered our main revenue generating sector in this country. And I'm speaking of the tourism sector, Mr. Speaker. As we are all aware, tourism contributes to almost 60% of the island's GDP. And we're all aware of the devastation of the sector in St. Lucia. The thousands of direct jobs as well as the indirect impact on jobs and businesses. Because make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, every other sector in this economy, in this country, relies on tourism. And with the state of the tourism sector at this point in time, every sector is suffering. Every individual, every business is suffering, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I remember very clearly from the very beginning, from the onset, the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance alluded to the shortfall in revenue which we were going to have this financial year. If I remember clearly, the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, quoted a figure of, I believe, almost $400 million in shortfall. And I remember also clearly, Mr. Speaker, that the member for Mikud South called on all citizens to play their part, in us navigating the turbulent waters ahead of us. There was a proposal that because of the shortfall of revenue, Mr. Speaker, that civil servants should consider a salary deferment. Not a salary cut, a deferment. But Mr. Speaker, the same members opposite who come to this honorable house and pretend that they want to work with the government to combat COVID-19, they were the very first ones. They were the very first ones, Mr. Speaker, who were agitating that it is not even 2 months since COVID that salaries cannot be paid to civil servants. We never asked for a wage cut. We asked for a deferment of 3 months. Because the Honorable Prime Minister said, Mr. Speaker, that there's 3 months of deferment, of course with interest being paid at the end of the fiscal year, would be able to give us some reprieve. We would have been able to have approximately $50 to $60 million of extra cash flow on hand to help the government meet its obligations at the end of every month. The members opposite know very well, Mr. Speaker, how government operates. They know very well that expenditure of government is paid based on revenue collected on a monthly basis. They know very well that there is no sinking fund. They knew very well, Mr. Speaker, as the member for Castro Southeast alluded to yesterday, that the almost $200 million which was in the local banks in the reserves, they used it. And therefore, the additional revenue which we would have saved of almost $60 million would have helped considerably in managing the cash flow of the government. But no, they agitated, they mobilized, they influenced their people to keep noise, to reject, and to say all sorts of things. But we had many more plans, Mr. Speaker. There was never any deferment, and up to this day, everybody have been paid their salaries in full. So it goes to show you, Mr. Speaker, when they talk of working together to combat COVID-19, it is always the Labour Party first, Mr. Speaker. It is always the Labour Party first.
Honorable members, let's not start this morning.
Member for Library, Mr. Speaker, you need to call on. he had a very rough landing.
Continue, honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the impact of COVID is severe. Unfortunately, we have a Prime Minister during this difficult time has been able to go out there and raise the needed monies, borrow the needed monies for us to combat COVID-19 and meet the obligations of this government, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the members opposite in 2014-15, where there was no COVID, we were not able to raise any monies. We were not able to borrow any monies. And what was the excuse yesterday? The excuse was about St. Kitts, Grenada, and all other countries, blaming everybody for their mistakes and their mismanagement of the economy, Mr. Speaker. We never complained. We went out, did what we had to do, and we were able to get all those monies, Mr. Speaker, and we are able to get this $40 million US today from the CDB because of the confidence that the financial institutions have in the leadership of this Prime Minister and this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, at the same time, the member for Labrie is criticizing the borrowing. He is also asking to put the monies in the hands of the people. Very confusing, very double standard, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, those monies which we are borrowing today will significantly, Mr. Speaker, help with the cash flow of the government moving forward. Mr. Speaker, COVID response, I think the Honorable Prime Minister...
Honorable members. Honorable member, I did allow you. With a little turbulence, I did allow you to know. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, we have daily testing of persons being done on this island. It is costing money, Mr. Speaker. All the hundreds of persons employed by the Ministry of Health doing the contact tracing, Mr. Speaker, costing monies, Mr. Speaker. The operations of the respiratory hospital, Mr. Speaker, is costing monies. The police, the boats are down, Mr. Speaker. There are new engines needed. The radar system is down, Mr. Speaker. All of those monies are needed to take care of all of those expenses, Mr. Speaker, to combat COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. He talks about putting money in the hands of the people. I do not know if he forgot that under this government, we have increased the public assistance program, persons on this program, by 1,000 people, Mr. Speaker. Again, additional money is needed to reach in the hands of those people, Mr. Speaker. We have placed over $10 million in the SLDB to assist SMEs in the hands of the people, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite know very well where the borrowing is going. But because of cheap politics, they want to come in this honorable house to score cheap political points. They go all over the place. And the member for Labrie spoke of William Peter Boulevard meeting. But after listening to him there this morning, I thought I was on the Castro's market steps, Mr. Speaker. Because his presentation was market steps talk, Mr. Speaker. Very shallow, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is just the attempt to create confusion, chaos, and division in the country, Mr. Speaker. That is what they do, Mr. Speaker. That is what they're famous for. Chaos, division, propaganda, misleading the electorate for their own selfish political gain, Mr. Speaker. But they will not succeed. So, Mr. Speaker, this borrowing is very critical. It is very important. It's needed at this point in time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, When you sit in this honorable house and you hear members opposite making statements such as at a stroke of a pen, fishermen and seamoss farmers' livelihoods was taken away from them, you have to ask yourselves, Mr. Speaker, are those members serious about working together in combating COVID-19? Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister, member for Mikud South, have explained on many occasions to the nation, to the fishermen. I was at that meeting with the fishermen the Tuesday, myself together with the Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries, and we alluded to the fact that when news of Martinique contracted over 700 cases of COVID in just 1 week, and they had gone on lockdown. And after consultation, Mr. Speaker, with the office of the CMO and the police, it was recommended that we take decisive action to close the backdoor operations which is currently taking place in the country to protect the citizenry of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. It was a national security decision. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, we have a Prime Minister, the member from Mikud South, Mr. Speaker, who puts the interest of the citizenry first before politics. He puts the interest of the citizenry first. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we had to shut down the operations of the fishermen for that 1 week, meet with them, and let them know what it is that we need of them to do to work with us to combat COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, we all know, Mr. Speaker, we all know that there are bona fide fishermen out there. When they go out to fish, they go out to fish. But we all know, Mr. Speaker, there are fishermen out there. When they tell you they go to fish, they do not go fishing, Mr. Speaker. And the member, Mr. Speaker, the member from Mikud North knows that we have non-bona fide fishermen out there. They know that. We all know that, Mr. Speaker. And we cannot afford, Mr. Speaker, to put the lives of 175,000 people at risk for a few non-bona fide fishermen, Mr. Speaker. Okay. And the decision had to be taken, Mr. Speaker. The decision had to be taken, Mr. Speaker. We had to bring them back to the drawing board for us to move on and protect the borders of this country, Mr. Speaker. Okay. They know all the fishermen with all the boats that they use. They know all the pirogues that they use. They know all the visions that they use. They know all the telemoyas that are used to go into backdoor, Mr. Speaker. They know it all, but they come into this honorable house, grand charging, pretending that there's so much for the fishermen, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, please stop for a while. Honorable members, let's keep the temperature. Yes. Honorable member, allow the member to be heard. Continue, Honorable Member Sufre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government will always work with the fishermen. We will always look after the fishermen. We will do everything that we can to assist the bona fide fishermen in this country to achieve their daily bread, to sustain their livelihoods, Mr. Speaker. But when you have those who are breaking the laws of this country, Mr. Speaker, and putting the lives of thousands at risk, Mr. Speaker, the government is going to do what it takes, what needs to be done as the governing party of this country to protect the citizenry, Mr. Speaker. So do not come and use the fishermen as pawns for your cheap politics in this honorable house, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you have the member from Castro South again. He has alluded to the tourist. He just alluded to tourists again this morning. And the member knows very well, Mr. Speaker, because he believes that he is the professor of everything, of all subject areas. He is the genius in economics, in tourism, CIP, agriculture, everything. He knows very well, Mr. Speaker, that the tourism sector, the devastation of the tourism sector, we have reopened the sector. It is a controlled sector, Mr. Speaker. He knows that. He knows that before anybody, tourist or national, comes to St. Lucia, they must have a COVID negative test, a PCR test. He knows that, Mr. Speaker. He alluded to some people, apparently with a rapid test. Okay? I am not saying maybe yes, one or two persons may slip through the channels, but listen, Mr. Speaker, he said that yesterday, but as a member of parliament in this honorable house, representing not only Castro South, but the people of St. Lucia, if you know of such incidents, can't you report this to the Ministry of Tourism, to the CMO's office? You have to work to come to this honorable house to make such utterances. That goes to show you, Mr. Speaker, when they talk of the people, who the people they're referring to are. The people.
Mr. Speaker.
That's right. It's all, the people are the St. Lucia Labour Party.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
People.
I think the honourable member is misleading the House. And I wish you would remind him what I said yesterday. And if he was sleeping like he was yesterday, snoring rather loudly, let me tell him what I said. I indicated that someone from overseas sent me some information indicating that the travel agency that was flying to St. Lucia was allowing self-administered tests. And that if it was necessary, I'm willing to share the information. I did not want to go into details. So, Mr. Speaker, I said it live. The member I noted was sleeping and snoring loudly, so he probably did not hear. So I'm informing him now.
But, Mr. Speaker, what have I said? Nothing differently. Nothing differently. You had to wait to come to the parliament to say it. When the ample time to call the CMO's office, call the Ministry of Tourism. That's how patriotic you are to St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, it shows, it tells you that the members opposite.
Just give me a minute. Honorable Member Ancillary Canneries and member for Castries Southeast, please keep the mask on as much as possible. And member for Castries South, you bring mask on, please. I will get it. So continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it goes to show you that the members opposite, they're not happy with the reopening of the tourism sector, because they know what that sector, the phase reopening of the sector is contributing to this economy. They know the number of hotels that have reopened and the number of persons who have gone back to work. They do not want them at work, Mr. Speaker. They know the revenue that it is generating, helping us to manage the affairs of the country. But they just come and pretend, Mr. Speaker, that they want to work with us. But they're not happy. They're not happy. And the actions of the members opposite, the actions of the member for Castro South, clearly shows that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I sat in the Honorable House yesterday and listened to the member for Castries East, leader of the opposition, responding to a statement made by the Honorable Prime Minister regarding his attendance at the NIMAC meeting, National Emergency Management Advisory Committee, and that he sent persons or an individual who is more capable, who knows more about NIMAC to represent him, Mr. Speaker. And I was so confused, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Because as far as I know, Mr. Speaker, NIMAC is chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister. It falls under the Minister responsible for disaster, NIMO, which is always in St. Lucia under the office of the Honorable Prime Minister, whichever Prime Minister or whichever party is in government. And to have, Mr. Speaker, a member of parliament, 25 years in this honorable house, three terms as a government minister, deputy prime minister for so many years, and a member who's aspiring to be prime minister, Mr. Speaker. We are in a medical economic crisis, COVID, and you're sending a little soldier with no rank in a meeting to represent you? Of generals? And this is the man, this is the member who is selling himself to the public as a prime minister in waiting? Come on, Mr. Speaker. So, if you are prime minister and St. Lucia is faced with a crisis, whether it is natural disaster or COVID as we are experiencing today, you would have taken a leave of absence. You would have taken a leave of absence. That is what you're telling the nation. That is the message you sent to St. Lucians yesterday. And if the honorable members on the opposite side were for the people of St. Lucia, today the member for Cashways East would have been sitting on another chair, Mr. Speaker. Because from last night, they should have taken a vote of no confidence in his leadership. They should have, Mr. Speaker. You cannot send a non-ranking soldier to a meeting with generals to plan your strategies on the battlefield against COVID. Come on, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend the member for Cashways East for being frank, for being honest with the people of St. Lucia, that he does not have the qualifications, he does not have the prerequisites to be prime minister, and that the Labour Party and the people of St. Lucia should look at alternatives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one thing I know, that the member for Mikud South is the general who has steered this country in that battle against COVID-19. And he has the unwavering support of the men and women on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, to continue, Mr. Speaker, to continue leading the fight against COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. To continue leading the fight of ensuring that we are able to bring those increases in numbers under control, Mr. Speaker, and that the economy is able to rebound whenever a vaccine is found, and we're able to bring back tourism to what it was pre-COVID times, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I do not want to be too long, but the actions of the members opposite, the actions in the opposition on many occasions to the state of emergency, Mr. Speaker, the actions in working on the constituents whom they represent when we had to present and enact the COVID Prevention and Control Bill, the boycott of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, and the reckless, selfish, malicious so-called match of 2,000 or 3,000 people, endangering the lives of many people, tells you, Mr. Speaker, that the members opposite are not ready to work with this government to fight COVID, and it is just politics as usual for them, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I am very confident that we are on the right track. The measures that we put in place, if the people of St. Lucia follow those measures, and with this new borrowing, the additional resources, additional services that is going to be provided, we will overcome COVID-19 when the time comes. Without any further ado, Mr. Speaker, I would like to record my support for the motion as presented by the Honorable Prime Minister. I thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister.
When they finish. Mr. Speaker, first of all, before I begin, certainly let me lend my voice to the passing of Mr. Wilkie Larcher. Definitely a person who has left his mark in the annals of St. Lucia's history. Certainly a gentleman who I have had the opportunity to meet on many occasions, and while we may have differed on politics, he was a gentleman and a person who always was very proud of being St. Lucian. And for that, I salute him, and certainly his family. I want to extend my condolences to his wife, his children. And I know that he certainly didn't think that he had COVID initially. He thought he had dengue. But this is the nature of the times that we're in, that if life was not complicated enough with having COVID, that at the same time that the region is having a significant increase in dengue, which has many of the similar symptoms. And so that's why none of us can be too safe, that once we start having any levels of symptoms, that we should try to report as early as possible to the health centers that we've set up in order to get some tests done. And I certainly hope that no one else in the family has been affected. And I know that there were other persons that were in contact with him, but I have the greatest amount of confidence in the contact tracing team that we have. I know that some of those individuals already have self-isolated, and we see a lot of that going on today, Mr. Speaker. It's a difficult situation, Mr. Speaker, because there are many elements to COVID which we sometimes are oblivious to. So when contact tracing identifies persons that need to be isolated, sometimes it causes a company to shut down. In the government's case, departments. Critical human resources that are required are now literally lost to the state, and more importantly, lost to the people of this country. And these are some of the things that we're fighting. So when we spoke about COVID initially, and what we attempted to do was, obviously, one was to save lives, and a critical component to saving lives was not allowing people to be infected in large numbers, which would put tremendous amount of pressure on the health facilities that we have. And that there's two components to that. Certainly is persons in isolation, which it's no secret we're struggling in terms of the amount of space that we have. And now having to rely probably more heavily on persons who have been tested positive, having to remain in their own homes in self-isolation. And that's certainly a risk. And certainly that's what history has taught us, that it's a risk. But we also, so far, have been able to avoid a significant number of cases that are critical. But again, the cases that we've seen where individuals only knew very late in the game that they had COVID means that there may be more persons who
are in a similar position, and therefore the pressure that's going to be starting to mount as to persons needing to go into hospitalization and more critically into an IC unit and a need for a respirator. So this is a serious situation. And it's sad that we're coming here today to debate a bill which is really in hindsight. The negotiations for the monies that we came here to seek Parliament's approval, the process is that we would have identified those funds from long ago. And while I very much appreciate the questions posed by the member from Labrie, but it's again peculiar, and this is where the seriousness of this nature, of this situation, the times that we're in, we need to get more respect from the opposition, Mr. Speaker. Because just yesterday, the leader of the opposition and also other members were asking me to report on what the current debt to GDP was and what the current state of the economy was. And yet the member from Labrie, very maybe inconspicuously, maybe unintended, talked that the government just had a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce in which all of the information was made public. And it gave a very true state of what the economic situation was. This is how he was able to cite the number that the debt to GDP currently is at 85%, and that with the construction of the airport, and depending on what happens with the GDP number, we have no idea. We're projecting still that the number can be somewhere between 20 and 26%. And we're not going to know that until next year, when the Statistics Department reviews all of the numbers. We know a real number. But the fact is that we know that the amount of borrowings has been fixed because that's what was approved in the appropriations bill. And the plan that the member from Labrie was speaking about as to what this money is going to be used for was in my appropriations speech. In fact, he can just dust it off from somewhere, and the full details of how we intend to economically and also from a health perspective deal with this crisis. I mean, I stood on my feet for over 3.5 hours, given a detailed plan of what we're going to do, and these monies were anticipated and were included in that solution. And this is where nobody was lying to anybody. The member from Soufrière Foncé-Jacques spoke about it, that when we, in April, had anticipated that even though that we'd had a commitment, there was a process that we had to go through to seek approvals before we can actually receive the money. And we said that it was not going to be till the end of the year that a substantial part of the resources that we had negotiated would come in, and that would create a cash flow problem. And this is where we were seeking the assistance of the civil servants to allow us to reduce the payments now, and that we would have reimbursed them by the end of the year. We knew that we would be in a position to reimburse them because we knew we were getting the money. So this is the behavior, Mr. Speaker, that we're talking about. And again, we're appealing to the members on the opposite side who have persons who follow them. That are going to take their words because they support their party, that's part of the system, but they are leaders. And it's not to abuse that position in this particular time of vulnerability of our country. You know, a document was made available. I assume it to be a legitimate document, SLP Communication Unit Work Plan. It says, to provide communication support and contribute to the St. Lucia Labour Party's campaign to to win the next general elections due between June 20th, 2020 and October 2021.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of
And
order.
the strategy...
Mr. Speaker, on the point of order.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, we
On the
keep
point of
going.
order.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister cannot come in this House, quote a document allegedly from the St. Lucia Labour Party and presenting it into the records, Mr. Speaker, without making it available and authenticating that this is in fact a St. Lucia Labour Party document. This is going into the records. We all know the character of the Prime Minister. There is no proof before us that this is an authentic document.
Honorable member. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, that's fine. Honorable Leader of the Opposition. There is an obligation on the Prime Minister to make documents of the House or to disclose documents of the House if the document is an official government document. If it's not, there is not an obligation on him to so make it a document of the House. I'm not saying that he does not have an obligation as a member of the House to be truthful in providing documents or quoting from documents. I wouldn't expect, we're all supposed to be honorable, so I wouldn't expect him to stand there and, but it's not a document of the government, based on what he's saying. That is fine. If no such document, honorable members, honorable members, let me say something. I try not to always turn to the standing order because I believe we are all honorable member. I'm being forced to do things that I do not want to do. That is the honest truth. I do not want to do it. I do not want to throw anybody. I don't want to ask anybody to leave the chamber. I do not. The business of the people, you represent the people, and the business of the people is supposed to be there, and you ought to be inside of it to discuss the business of the people. Simple. That is my philosophy, and I try my best not to in any way infringe on your right to speak, and I will keep to that as much as possible. If what the Prime Minister is quoting from is not an authentic St. Lucia Labour Party document, then as member of the opposition, you will get an opportunity to refute that, You will get an opportunity to refute that. You have to take the opportunity to refute it when the time comes. But there's nothing at this present time for me to see. Mr. Prime Minister is not quoting from a Labour Party document. I cannot say that. I'm taking it that the Prime Minister is honorable, as we all are supposed to be, and he's not standing there and misleading the House. Honorable Member Dennis, please go quiet for the time being. Okay, honorable members. Continue, honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just for everybody's edification, this is a document that was certainly in circulation on the internet, and I certainly don't recall, and it may have happened that members on the opposite side disowned the document, but certainly when you read the document and you see what is taking place in the country, it's very easy to think that this is an authentic document. So it says the strategy to accomplish this is with a communications unit. One is to disseminate the issues that will change the government's reputation and that of individual ministers and resonate with the electorate both in the national and constituency level. Two, respond and counter the attacks that will be directed at discrediting the SLP by the other side. And three, promote the vision of the SLP for a better future for St. Lucia. The issues that seem to be currently fueling the ULP are anger against the Prime Minister, Alan Chasney. One, his handling of the economy during the COVID crisis. The majority of the people are suffering because of the unemployment caused by the downturn in the economy. Mr. Speaker, it goes on to talk about how it intends to implement what they're currently doing. But what the document clearly alludes to, Mr. Speaker, is that members on the opposite side genuinely believed that elections was going to be called while we were in the state of emergency. And where would they have gotten that idea from? And the document makes reference to it, Mr. Speaker, that it was the elections in St. Kitts. It says, we are currently in this phase which can be said to have begun on the 4th anniversary of the 2016 six elections, when the Prime Minister, in an anniversary message, declared the elections will be soon. The SLP political leader responded 1 week later by saying that the SLP was in a campaign mode and let the campaign begin. The phase will end on the announcement of the date of the elections, expected anytime between July and September of 2020, based on the soon declaration. The focus of this phase is to be in issue 1, anger against the Prime Minister. Issue 2, corruption and responding to WT attacks. Assuming the elections are not soon, that this is after September, there should be a gradual introduction of the vision of the SLP. However, St. Lucia is currently under a state of emergency until September, and the UWP, following the St. Kitts Nevis playbook, may very well call elections during that period, or early October. The UWP will therefore launch and have in fact started to mount a very aggressive media campaign, particularly social media, and the SLP must be just as and even more aggressive. And it names a host of people. Print was David Vitalis and Michael Willius and Andrew Antoine. We know who these people are. Facebook, Alison Joseph and Andrew Antoine, Ignatius Jean and Martin Satney.
Honorable Prime
Video
Minister,
production.
Honorable Prime Minister, may I suggest that you don't call anyone's name at this present time, please, sir?
No problem, with great respect, Mr. Speaker. But the document is on the internet. Persons can acquaint themselves with the document. They'll see the names for themselves. These are the same persons that we're seeing on a regular basis disseminating fake news. Mr. Speaker, when I came to the House yesterday, I did something that's not within my character, is to really call out the opposition. I didn't call them out, Mr. Speaker, to embarrass them or to try to score political points. I call them out because at this juncture, as to where we are as a country, we need to all come together. I hold no grudges. I mean, if I held grudges, imagine how angry of a person I would be based on what has been said about me and done to me over the last 5 years. You may make fun, some may make fun and say it's not true, but revenge is for the Lord. It's not for me. It is definitely for me to turn the other cheek, but at the same time I must balance that level of forgiveness with the leadership that is required in this country, particularly at this very difficult time, Mr. Speaker. And I was really hoping that after my appeal yesterday, that maybe we would have seen a different tone, particularly as it pertains to COVID. But we can see that members on the opposite side have continued their charade of wanting to pretend that they care about this country, that they care about the people of this country, and that they're supporting us being not the government, but us in terms of the country, in combating COVID. We've said from early, COVID doesn't know any discrimination. It doesn't know political discrimination. It doesn't know age, gender, ethnicity, or income. The height of it is that the President of the United States of America and many global leaders have been tested positive for COVID. So there's no institution, there's no barriers. The only way to fight COVID is to follow the protocols and the guidelines that the scientists have given to us. We've seen one of our best allies in Taiwan prove that to be right above and beyond any reasonable doubt. 230 days and counting of no COVID cases, 25 million people who can live in unity and in harmony and within discipline. And yes, they had the benefit of having SARS and learning that those protocols would work, and the same protocols for SARS are in many ways the same protocols for COVID. But the reality, Mr. Speaker, is that we have to come together. And the appeal that we've been making has for the leadership of the opposition to play its part. That is what the appeal is here. And to stop the petty politics. Stop believing that there's going to be an elections, and putting elections and your own desire to be in governance above and beyond the health of this country. That is what we're asking for them to do. Is it okay, Mr. Speaker, for the members on the opposite side to speak and have a difference of opinion on financial matters, social programs? No problem. But the government has deliberately set up systems to allow them to participate and for their voices to be heard. Not in isolation, but there would be other civil society members there. It does mean that when some groups in civil society, like what we saw when we were trying to introduce the COVID Act, that they would have stood with the government. They knew what we were doing, that we were replacing the state of an emergency, and that what? We were supposed to now wait 2 weeks? We're seeing that even the protocols and the authority that we've given to the state in the COVID Act may in fact not be sufficient to deal with this crisis. Because one of the things that the COVID Act does not include is the ability to do a curfew. And so we've attempted, by amending the working hours, the licenses of businesses, to prevent them, to stop them from operating after 9 o'clock, not being able to put a curfew in, and saying to people, but go home. Go to work and go home. And if you don't have to go to work and you can work from home, stay home. Stop socializing. We did not want to close the grocery stores because we know that that causes more chaos. We didn't want to stop people from being able to get liquor, but what we wanted to do is to stop people from congregating together and drinking liquor. That's what we attempted to do. It doesn't matter how much money we're able to raise. And the member from Labrie put it succinctly. The more money that we have to borrow, the deeper the hole we set for ourselves. And it's in time, how do we resolve that issue? We've borrowed what we've had to borrow to fill the gap of the shortfall of tax revenues. Because if we didn't do that, it meant that government would have to let people go home. You want me to say it in English? Because you know what the government's budget is. The minister, the member from Castries East, he knows it. $310 million to finance debt. $540 million in salaries and pensions, and $400 million in operating cost. And if you're going to reduce operating costs, the only way you can reduce operating costs is by reducing the number of people that are working in government. And if you're not going to borrow the money on these concessionary terms, it means that you would have had to send people home. And in this particular time that we're in, nobody in the world, not one country in the world, has believed that austerity is the solution to the problem. And this idea that you want to stand on a box and yell to the world that St. Lucia's debt to GDP has gone from 59% to 85%, what has happened to the rest of the world? Every single country in the Caribbean has gone through the same thing. Countries like America, their debt to GDP now is higher than 100%. The UK, Canada. Canada has had the highest deficit in its history, 18% and counting. The difference is, and we've discussed it, their central banks give them the ability to buy their own bonds. We're having to walk a fine line. I'm never going to look for the Labour Party to pat me on the back and say you did a great job. That's not their job. I get it. But when the politics gets to the point that you're prepared to jeopardize the health and the safety of this country, that is when we have to stand up and say enough is enough. Legitimate questions. Talked about CIP. And again, you see, Mr. Speaker, if it's asked in a manner in which there is a legitimate need to know, and there is a mechanism in this House for members on the other side to ask questions, if in fact they really want to know. But a lot of information is already out there. So when we talk about the bonds with COVID, as if we're going to have to get these bonds and we're going to have to repay the money as if it's going to increase debt. I'm sure if I go back to Hansard, Mr. Speaker, you're going to see I said repeatedly, the intention is that those bonds will replace existing debt. So short-term debt that were 90 days or 100 days or 120 days or 360 days, a 1-year debt, treasury bill, that we could now take these bonds, which are 5 years with no interest, and use that to replace it. So it's not about increasing the debt to GDP, it's about reducing the cost, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, at this particular juncture, reducing amount of short-term debt that we currently have. And so we have 20 applications in for the bonds as we speak. 7 of those applications have already been approved. So once the 20 applications have been approved, we would have generated about $13 million approximately. And of the 7 that have already been sold, we have received $5 million to do that. In terms of our CIP program we've indicated is already 129%, 130% higher than it was last year. And we have about $10 million that we've earned in donations, and those funds are going into the economic fund. The economic fund has been established. The only thing that is remaining to be established is the actual physical account. So the monies are in an account at CIP, waiting to be transferred over to the economic fund. So that is a state of play. And look, we're very happy with the improvements that we've seen, but this idea that CIP is generating hundreds of millions of dollars like they may have in other countries, remember St. Lucia is still very new in the game. To compare St. Lucia's numbers to St. Kitts or to Dominica, you know, St. Kitts was, I think, if not mistaken, the late 80s, and Dominica was the early 90s. But they've been in this program. St. Lucia, relatively, is a new kid on the block. Antigua is a bit older than we are, and we're probably closer to Grenada. So relative to some of those other islands, we continue to do very well. I think that the bond was a good initiative, and the policy behind the bond is, I think, an excellent initiative, particularly as the Minister of Finance, and understanding what's taking place globally, particularly on our bond market here regionally. whatever we can do to offset those monies, we will. Now, in part, the persons or institutions that have not rolled over their bonds, it means that we've had to pay cash to pay out those bonds. But it also means that our debts come down because we've fulfilled our debt obligation in that regard. So the good news is that your debt to GDP will be stabilized and the amount of debt you have is stabilized. But the bad news is that it's occupying and taking a significant amount of cash at a very difficult time that we have right now. I want to say to Mr. Speaker that I will continue to practice what I think is respect, and that when there are critical issues, I will pick up the phone and call the Leader of the Opposition, and also members from his party. But I always try, the best of my ability, to call him first. On the occasion when we had the situation in Dennery, I did try calling him a couple of times. I was not able to get through to him. I felt it was sufficiently important that I call the member from Dennery North, which I did. I did express to him that I had not gotten a hold of the Leader of the Opposition, and he assured me that he would pass on the information and also try to get that meeting to take place as quickly as possible. And he did so. But I also want to say I followed up with the member to reiterate to him that there would be no politics. And that certainly I will not personally be involved in any of the meetings. But I wanted to give him the assurance that if in fact at any time anything was going the wrong way, that he could call me. And that the CMO and the Commissioner of Police and their team would be the ones that would be involved directly on the ground. And so we did speak about the representative that we have in the constituency, because she plays a role. They are persons that are party supporters. So political parties are institutions in a community. And so therefore the leaders of those institutions, whether it be the church, whether it be political parties, whether it be youth groups, whether it be parent and teachers associations, all of them have a role to be at the table. And we had I won't reveal everything that we said, but we had that conversation. Sorry? There are no secrets. And so I basically, said that he would be the key person from all of the government perspective, from a political perspective. And I agreed and gave him the assurances of my support in that regard. And this government has, on this occasion of COVID, continually taken the line of stepping back. And this is why, even to a fault, the Minister of Health, people say, well, we're not seeing the Minister of Health as prominently as we think that we should. We've asked as a government to step back and have allowed the CMO and all of the government officers to take the lead in this issue. The one departure from that is the Prime Minister, because I have a role not just as a cabinet member, but I am the Prime Minister. And so, as a spokesperson, there are things that people want to hear specifically from a Prime Minister, but I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that we are always trying to make sure that we're following the guidelines. This issue of the NEMAC, and I'm sorry to have called the Leader of the Opposition out on this, but I think it was important. It's important for him to know that this is not something that you can advocate or give to somebody else. Sorry, not advocate. That you can delegate to someone else. This is too important. And the fact is that several of the NEMAC meetings we have, the government has said and received, or at the meetings, persons have made recommendations, and we have amended the strategy and the policies at those meetings. So these are important meetings to participate in. And I'm going to give him a heads up that there's more than likely going to be another NEMAC meeting on Friday, which will be a critical meeting. And I'm really hoping that despite his own inadequacies or self-proclaimed inadequacies, that he will come. That he will come and participate in the management of this process and put politics aside. Mr. Speaker, we've spoken about, you know, Mr. Speaker, again, that the member from Castries East is saying he has an engagement on Friday. And that's why I made the point. The member from Castries East, who's the leader of the opposition, is the only one on the opposition side who's actually paid the salary of a minister, and given the trappings and the support of having a ministry. And it's a very important point, because at this point, I cannot imagine that there is anything more important to the public of St. Lucia, if he's going to be in public life, to be at the NEMAC meeting. And again, I've been asked, and I will continue to do so, to ask the government, the opposition, to meaningfully participate in these meetings that we're setting up. Thank you. So, Minister, we also want to talk about laptops. Prior to COVID, the government had embarked on a program of e-books. The e-books was a significant departure from what we have seen in the past, Mr. Speaker, in that the e-books included programs on it that were the actual books of the curriculum. So the previous laptops that were given out had nothing on it other than internet access. But the point of the e-books is that 17 of the books are actually downloaded on it. So we're accomplishing a couple things. One, understanding that we're going to be going to a different learning platform in the future. More importantly, save money, because currently persons are paying in excess of $1,000 to $1,200 a year for their school books. And more importantly, and very frustratingly, when the Ministry of Education changes the addition, the books that you had are now become obsolete. This system will allow you to pay a license, which the license is $150 US, if I'm not mistaken, Madam Minister of Education. And that gives you all the updates. And that's for 17 of the books in the curriculum, depending on the form that you're in. The e-books also give a link, meaning that links to other internet sites are there. Graphics, so for instance, in the case of science, you would not necessarily need to be physically in a science lab because it's done graphically. And more importantly, the information of communication, or the data of information that is accumulated between the communication between the teacher and the student is saved. So at any time that a parent wants to see what's been going on with their child and the teacher, they're able to do that. The system also gives us the ability that it will let the teacher know how long a student has been reading the book, and also whether in fact they did their homework. So even before they come to class, the teachers are actually much more equipped in knowing. And in fact, some very simple questions can actually determine whether in fact the child was lying or not, meaning the child could potentially just leave the computer on to a page and it records it as being read. It can also, parents can do the homework. These are things that we can't prevent from happening, but certainly if in fact the record states that the child did those things, the assumption is that the child would be able to answer certain questions. We think that this is a much more meaningful way moving forward. Now, we were in a pilot phase of this project before COVID came in, and obviously because of cash, the financial commitments that we had to give to the companies to get the additional e-books was not possible. We were dealing with a significant cash crisis in the country, and then we were able to slowly, through the assistance of, can't remember the institution, NTRC, we were able to come in and buy some, pay for some of the books, and we were able to scramble with the Ministry of Finance to be able to get the remaining amount of money to get the remaining e-books for the Form 3ers all throughout the system, and we have just put in an order which would allow us by January, if I'm not mistaken, to distribute e-books to Form 4, Form 5, and I think some Form 2s, if I'm not mistaken. People might say, why didn't happen faster? Well, it has to go through a pilot phase. You have to go through a pilot phase because there are significant issues that the teachers have to be able to accept what we're doing and that it works. The students the abilities of parents and the trainings, the maintenance of the e-books. So we're actually training a unit to actually fix the units here. So there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure that was required to cause this to happen, but certainly COVID has caused us to move much faster than we would have liked to have done in rolling out this system. But I have to say to you, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the Ministry of Education, and as difficult as it was at times, I clearly understand the process that they had to go through, but this is going to be a game changer for our students, a game changer. And certainly, even at Sir Arthur Lewis, with the new principal that we have, the Orange Economy, streamlining some of the courses that we have up there and becoming more effective, and more importantly, creating a new entity that's going to help bridge the gap between graduation and getting a job. And we think that the institution needs to play a more significant role in helping that happen, because it also gives them feedback on the curriculum needs in the workforce. And both from a secondary school as well as Sir Arthur, this absolute link between the private sector, which includes the government entities, as well as private sector businesses, that we are training persons that with life skills that allow them to make a significant contribution to improve the competitiveness of our country, the productivity of our country, and more meaningfully, hopefully, that they get jobs that they can actually be more productive and get paid more money for. Speaker, the branding of bananas. This is serious business. It's not about branding bananas to say that we're going to encourage more people to eat bananas in St. Lucia. That is part of it. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that the consumption of 340,000 tourists coming to here for 7 nights is going to be sufficient to allow the banana farmers to produce all the bananas they need. Bananas and cocoa give us an opportunity to produce a product in which globally the consumption is much more than what we are currently consuming. And I think that we can certainly, we know, get back up to 60,000 tons. That is the intention of this government. And we've had several obstacles, but we're not being deterred. And I'd like to think that the farmers would appreciate that every time that there's needed financial support because of what was taking place with Windfresh, we've stood up. The work that's taking place at Volette with producing a new Beausaint-Jus and a more modernized technical support, the lab that's been created at Union for soil testing, the work that we're doing in re-engineering Windfresh, the work that we're doing with cocoa, and bringing finances to the table as to what is it that an acre of land or 5 acres of land can yield, and to try to provide the training for more sustainable farming in this country, and more importantly, to encourage more young people that are actually our brightest. Farming should not be something that if you can't do anything else that you end up in farming. It is too important in this country, and we need some of our brightest minds to get involved, but to do that, there has to be a mechanism in which persons can earn a significant amount of income, and we do have some examples in this country of people who have done that. Mr. Speaker, I get very concerned when persons want to just put out half-truths. This government has been on record to say that the difficulty in moving into OKEU by the former government, which they never admitted, was the financing of it, the cost. And we've said it. We've said the numbers repeatedly. The cost of running Victoria Hospital was $35 million. And there's nobody in St. Lucia that could say that Victoria Hospital was being run efficiently. Best hospital in the world, or even the best hospital in the Caribbean. The word best and Victoria were never used in the same sentence. So is it true that it's 35 million? It's probably a lot more. And the estimates for moving into OKEU, estimates would be that it would be $70 million. But there were several assumptions that went along with that. And the fact is that we were not ready to move into OKEU. And yes, we have attempted to bring persons in not to ever privatize OKEU. We left the privatization of OKEU to the opposition. They did it by making it a statutory body. That's when the privatization took place. It's called Millennium Heights. And they couldn't even, they're always the first persons to, when you come to the House, to point out flaws in the legislation and the drafting. Yet, when they passed it, what they did is they included Victoria Hospital. So in essence, legally, the persons who were working at Victoria Hospital were working illegal because they were supposed to be working for Millennium Heights. But in fact, they were working for the Ministry of Health. But guess what? We all make these mistakes. And over time, we get these issues resolved. But the point was, the decision was made that you could not continue to operate OKEU the same way that you were operating Victoria Hospital. And the goal was to create Millennium Heights and have its own board. And the reality is, what we felt was that the operating system that was there was insufficient. Victoria compared to St. Jude's. St. Jude's had the benefit of Mercy Hospital coming down here in 2000 and providing a proper operating system. So we had to make sure that we brought a company in, and we went through the Canadians, we went through a British firm, we went through Martinique, until we were able to select a company that is an Indian company that have a hospital operation at Cayman, but have 54 hospitals. And that team of people will be here very shortly. Sadly, they were supposed to be here before, but because of COVID, they couldn't get out of India. But those persons are not coming in here to run the hospital. They're coming in here to set up the systems to help us run the hospital. What we've spoken about is the tertiary level healthcare as health tourism. And clearly Tapia and some other entities have had interest in doing that, and that's something that we remain very committed to. And we've also said having a proper international hospital here helps in terms of attracting investment in our country. All those persons who may want to become now e-nomads and move to a destination like St. Lucia are going to do so even more willingly if in fact the healthcare system that we have is of international level. Is it true that St. Lucians are leaving to go to other places to get healthcare services? It is. And it's impossible for us to be able to, by the population that we have, to provide a global tertiary level healthcare system by ourselves. So it has to be part of a university, it has to be part of tourism, of persons coming from abroad or attracting other people from the OECS. And those are the plans that we have had in terms of healthcare. Mr. Speaker, the debt management of our economy remains priority one. The member talked about the credit rating going down to BB minus. I mean, I would have hoped that he would have been genuine enough or interested enough that he actually would have read the report from Cara Chris. Cara Chris was not as concerned about the debt to GDP number because of the types of borrowings that we were having were not going to put significant financial pressure on us. They were more concerned about how quickly the tourism sector would recover and the pressure that that would put on our finances going down the road. That's what they're concerned about. And those are the things that we continue to try to put forward. And when we talk about saving lives and saving livelihoods, that's exactly what we mean. We can't do one without the other. And this naivety that's being expressed by members on the other side, that every time that they're not happy with something, they put people's lives as being the reason why we should do it, as if equally solving the economic problem is not as important. And as I keep saying, if it has to come down to a choice between one or the other at a particular point, then saving a life is more important. Because you can't buy somebody's life. We get that. But why do you want to make it any more difficult than those choices that we have to make? That is the reality of the situation. And under the circumstances, I'm very proud of what this administration has been able to do in managing the economy of this country and managing the finances of this country and the support and the confidence that people have. So this loan that we're here to debate today came out of what? of the appropriations bill and the policies that this government adopted right after COVID. And the IMF and the World Bank and the ECCB as well as CDB have all concurred that's the way to go. And it's on the basis of that that they have given us these options. So this is not to approve the CDB loan. This is to be able to approve the conditions that we have. Sorry? So, Mr. Speaker, I keep hearing this thing, and I guess when you're in opposition, that's your job, is always to try to create some level of uncertainty. And I talk about the remarks that I made with regards to the country being broke. I have said the country was broke in the past. It was broke because we were not providing an adequate, sufficient quality health care. It was broke because we were not providing the level of education. It was broke because we were not providing the level of security in this country. And then when you looked at the fact that we were running a deficit, and you looked at how the former government for 15 years managed this economy, that we were broke. But the context of COVID, what I simply said, Mr. Speaker, is that closing down this country is not an option. And if we have to shut this country down again, the reality is there is not going to be any more $80 million from NIC. The monies that we've gotten from the World Bank and from the IMF, these are one-time injections. And so therefore we must find a way to coexist. And that the initial ideas of the threats of COVID, we understand it better. We know that if we put into practice some of these principles, we can do it. Taiwan has done it. Their economy is not shut down. They've operated. And so you can do it. Many other countries have done it. We can do it. Not only can we do it, but we have to do it. Because if we genuinely care about each other, about our family members and our neighbors, our friends, and our country, it requires us to come together and to practice the discipline that's required to beat this thing. There's no magic wand. It comes down to the commitment of each person individually. And this government is concerned, and that's a light word, of the fake news. But equally, we believe in freedom of speech. Former government, when they were under pressure, created 361. It took them over a year before they could change it. We don't want to go in that direction. But there has to be a line in which there is some level of responsibility. And that responsibility is on an individual basis, an association basis. And I was happy when the leader of the opposition condemned some of the statements, but I want also to see him put it into practice. We have to stop it. The last thing we should be doing is causing any confusion in the general public's mind about what we're going on. I become concerned when I hear members on the opposite side support the idea and defend the statement by the leader of the opposition that this country was the worst prepared for COVID. You would think that evidence, even with what's happening here today, is contrary to that position. And again, this is the kind of utterances and statements that are irresponsible and are shameful. And on one hand, you can't say that you support the technocrats. On the other hand, you make a statement like that and want to defend it, Mr. Speaker. We have to be able to rise above politics, rise above the desire to get into government. Your day will come. You've said it yourself. 4 years goes by fast. 5 years goes by fast. If you know that that's the case, Mr. Speaker, if you know that that's what the case is, wait. But this idea that you would rush and every day calling for elections in the middle of a COVID pandemic tells everybody, I don't have to see it, the people see it for themselves, but I'm appealing to you that there are some people in our society that are taking your word for it and are refusing to participate in what we're attempting to do, and we need every single St. Lucian to adhere to the protocols if we're going to solve the problem that we have. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, a very famous American said, Patrick Henry, he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." In this case, I want both liberty and I want to avoid death. And I'm appealing once more to the opposition to show the maturity and the fortitude on this COVID situation to speak with one voice. I'm appealing to you again as a leader to please come to the NEMAC meeting, participate. That is where you get to put in your inputs. We invited you all to participate in the economic recovery, and you sent letters to say you were no longer going to come. So, Mr. Speaker, and we've seen that the economic recovery is working, and I want to thank those civil society members and institutions that continue to come to the meetings, voicing their opinions, and I would like to think that they are also very cognizant and appreciative of what's been taking place. So, Mr. Speaker, the one last one I really want to deal with, because I think it's a sensitive issue, and the member from Labrie brought it up, which was regards to Barbados and wage support. And I hope that we can go to that direction in order that Barbados has an unemployment insurance scheme. So, and that's an unemployment insurance scheme that has been there forever. And so therefore there's monies set aside to deal with this issue. St. Lucia does not. So every dollar that we've had to put into income support, Mr. Speaker, has come from new monies at the expense of something else. And so we've said to have a health insurance system as well as an unemployment insurance are definitely things that we have to proceed with. And we're going to have to set monies aside for these kinds of times. Because we were lucky that we were able to find a mechanism through the NIC to get some level of income support. But it would have been very difficult for the government on itself to have found $80 million to provide income support to those persons who are NIC contributors. So if we're going to make analysis, let us do it the right way. His last statement was that we're collecting the $1.50, but people are not enjoying the roads, but on the other hand, we should not be doing roads. The fact is that the economy's recovery is being supported by, one, being able to reopen our borders, two, the construction jobs that we're doing, that we're able to push forward, both in roads, in major infrastructure, buildings that are going up, and thirdly, the ITC sector. We've seen over 2,000 new jobs come into that sector. Very difficult in this particular time with what's taken place with COVID. We continue to work with them on their overall protocols. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that I was able to sufficiently answer a lot of the questions that members on the other side have brought up, but I also want to really say to them and appeal to them that as it pertains to COVID, put the politics aside, put the elections aside, let's put the people of this country first, and let's make it matter. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is, that Parliament authorizes the Minister, that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $40 million from the Caribbean Development Bank, consisting of a special funds resources portion in the amount of US $10,800,000 and an ordinary capital resources portion in the amount of US $19,200,000 for the purpose of financing the implementation of policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response and achieving fiscal stability. Be it further resolved that A, in the case of the special funds resources portion, 1, the loan is repayable in 80 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on A, the first due date after the expiration of 5 years following the date of the loan agreement, or B, a later due date specified in writing by the Caribbean Development Bank. 2. Interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the special fund resources portion withdrawn and outstanding. B. In the case of the ordinary capital resources portion, 1. The loan is repayable in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on A. the first due date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or B. a later due date specified in writing by the Caribbean Development Bank. 2. Interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 4.1% per annum on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion withdrawn and outstanding. 3. A commitment charge, A, is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion unwithdrawn. B, accrues from the 60th day following the date of the loan agreement. I now put a question in as many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided under Section 41 of the Administration Act, the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that a guarantee involving a financial liability is not binding on government unless the Minister of Finance grants the guarantee in accordance with an enactment or with the prior approval of Parliament by resolution of Parliament. And whereas it is further provided under Section 42 of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that any obligation arising from a guarantee given in accordance with Section 41 is a debt charge, and all debt charges for which the government is liable shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated fund. And whereas Parliament approved the guarantee of a loan in the amount of EC $202,500,000 for the purpose of financing the Honora International Airport redevelopment project by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited under the Finance Administration Act, resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing by St. Lucia and Air Seaports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited to finance the Honora International Airport redevelopment project, published as statutory instrument number 124 of 2019. And whereas the interest on the loan is payable monthly at a rate of 5.5% per annum during the 60-month moratorium period, and not semi-annually as provided by the statutory instrument number 124 of 2019, and consequently statutory instrument number 124 of 2019 must be revoked. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to guarantee a loan in the amount of $202,500,000 for the purpose of financing the Honora redevelopment project by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited as follows. Bank of St. Lucia Limited, $58,900,000. First National Bank of St. Lucia, $54,500,000. Grenada Cooperative Bank, $40,100,000. Antigua Commercial Bank Limited, $24,500,000. Eastern Caribbean Amalgamated Bank, $24,500,000. And whereas the loan is repayable over a period of 20 years with a 6-month moratorium on the principal payments with the interest only paid. And whereas the interest is payable quarterly from the date of the initial disbursement of the loan at a rate of 5% per annum during the 60-month moratorium period, at a rate of not exceeding 5% per annum at the expiry of the 60-month moratorium period, and the commencement of blended payments including interest and principal. And whereas the blended interest rate will be provided semi-annually, which will reflect the relative proportion of cash and government guarantee security provided, and the interest is payable at 4.5% on the cash security provided and 5% on the government guarantee security provided. And whereas the blended payments including principal and interest to be paid monthly. And whereas a commitment fee of 0.75% is payable on the disbursement of the loan. Be it resolved that Parliament revokes the Finance Administration Act resolution to Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing by the St. Lucia Air and Sea Ports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited to finance the Honora International Airport Redevelopment Project, published as Statutory Instrument Number 124 of 2019. Be it further resolved that the Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of EC $202,500,000 for the purpose of financing the Honora International Airport Redevelopment Project by the St. Lucia Air Sea Ports Authority from a syndicate banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia's Limited as follows. The Bank of St. Lucia Limited, $58,900,000. First National Bank Limited, $54,500,000. Grenada Cooperative Bank, $40,100,000. Antigua Commercial Bank, $24,500,000. Eastern Caribbean Amalgamated Bank, $24,500,000. Thank you. The loan is repayable over a period of 20 years with a 60-month moratorium on the principal payments with the interest only paid. The interest is payable quarterly from the date of the initial disbursement of the loan, at a rate of 5.5% per annum during the 60-month moratorium period, at a rate of not exceeding 5% per annum on the expiry of the 60-month moratorium period, the commencement of blended payments including interest and principal. The blended interest rate will be provided semi-annually, which will reflect the relative proportion of cash and government guarantee security provided at the interest, and the interest is payable at 4.5% on the cash security provided and 5% on the government guarantee security provided. The blended payments including principal and interest to be paid monthly. A commitment fee of 0.75% is payable on the disbursement of the loan. Mr. Speaker, the resolution before the Parliament seeks the approval the Government of St. Lucia to guarantee a loan for $202,500,000 EC dollars from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia for the purpose of financing the Honora International Airport Redevelopment Project on behalf of the St. Lucia Air and Sea Ports Authority. Mr. Speaker, Section 41 of the Finance Administration Act states that a guarantee involving a financial liability is not binding on the government unless the Minister of Finance grants the guarantee in accordance with enactment or with the prior approval of Parliament by resolution of Parliament. Further, Mr. Speaker, Section 42 of the Finance Administration Act stipulates that any obligation arising from a guarantee given in accordance with Section 41 of the said Act is a debt charge, and all debt charges for which the government is liable shall be charged on and paid out of the consolidated funds. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that a resolution of Parliament was approved in the Honourable House in 2019 authorizing the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing for the St. Lucia Air and Sea Ports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited to finance the Honora International Airport Redevelopment Project. And this authority was published as a Statutory Instrument Number 124 of 2019. Statutory Instrument Number 124 of 2019 authorized the guarantee for borrowing the said sum, but did not accurately capture the treatment of the interest. The statutory instrument correctly allowed for the interest on the loan to be payable quarterly at a rate of 5.5% from the date of disbursement of the loan to the end of the grace period in 5 years. However, it is required that the interest be paid semi-annually at a rate of 5% per annum at the end of the moratorium for the remaining life of the loan. Statutory instrument number 124 of 2019 stated the interest is payable semi-annually at a rate upon up to 5% per annum at the expiry of the grace period of 5 years. This wording, Mr. Speaker, is not in harmony with the term sheet. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, statutory instrument number 124 of 2019 did not state that the blended interest rates would be determined semi-annually at the end of the moratorium period, and that there would be a subsequent payments of both interest and principal after the moratorium comes to an end. As such, Mr. Speaker, there is a need to have the statutory instrument number 124, 2019 to be rescinded, since it is not consistent with the current terms and conditions agreed by the parties. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, the resolution before this House is to have statute instrument number 124 of 2019 be revoked and replaced with a new statutory instrument. Mr. Speaker, let me state clearly this request is not for additional borrowing for the Hunor International Airport redevelopment, but is simply an amendment to the current statutory instrument. The revised statement for the new statutory instrument will reflect the following. Parliament to authorize the Minister for Finance to guarantee borrowing of $202,500,000 for the purpose of financing the Hunor International Airport redevelopment project by St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority for a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited. The Bank of St. Lucia, $58,900,000. First National Bank, $54,500,000. Grenada Cooperative Bank, $40,100,000. Antigua Commercial Bank, $24,500,000. Eastern Caribbean, amalgamated Bank Limited, thank you. EC $24,500,000. The effective terms of the loan are summarized as follows. The loan is repayable over a period of 20 years with 60-month moratorium on principal payments, during which only interest payments will be made. The moratorium period includes the actual implementation of the project, which has an estimated duration of 30 months. The interest payments shall be made quarterly from the date of the first disbursement of the loan to SLASPA and shall continue on a quarterly basis during the 60-month moratorium period. Once the 60-month moratorium period comes to an end, blended payments will be made monthly and will comprise the payments of both interest and principal. The interest will be calculated at a rate of 5.5% per annum during the 60-month moratorium period. However, after the expiry of the moratorium period, interest will be charged at a rate of not exceeding 5% per annum. The blended interest rates will comprise 4.5% per annum on the cash security and 5% per annum on the government guarantee security. Blended interest rates will be provided for semi-annually and will reflect the proportion of cash government guarantee security provided. It should be noted that whilst the interest is determined semi-annually, the payments will be made monthly after the expiry of the moratorium. A commitment fee of 0.75% is payable upon the disbursement of the loan funds. All legal and out-of-pocket expenses incurred in connection with the loan facility will be the responsibility of SLASPA. Mr. Speaker, I wish to reiterate that this adjustment in the language is simply to reflect the correct terms and conditions of the loan. Further, Mr. Speaker, I need to re-emphasize the point that this is not an additional loan or guarantee for SLASPA. This change, however, is necessary. Mr. Speaker, it has also been determined that it will result in a cost savings to SLASPA of approximately $3 million over the life of the loan. As such, Mr. Speaker, there will be no additional cost to be borne by SLASPA or the government, but on the contrary, there will be some savings to SLASPA. Mr. Speaker, this borrowing is necessary to augment the loan from the Import-Export Bank of China, Taiwan, for the purpose of financing the Hunor International Airport redevelopment. The project is presently in a state of readiness for implementation, and major works are expected to commence in the coming weeks. This project, Mr. Speaker, is anticipated to be the biggest investment in infrastructure of our country and is expected not only to provide a significant amount of employment opportunities, but also generate much needed income and consumption for many households. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in the loss of hundreds of jobs in St. Lucia, and construction will be one of the driving forces for the recovery going well. It will allow many to reclaim some of what they have lost as a result of the crisis and will create the impetus for growth in our economy. Many subcontractors and the construction workers will certainly welcome the increased level of construction activity which will soon be on the ground. This will no doubt, Mr. Speaker, cause a ripple effect and result in the immense benefit to the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, it's also important to point out that the resources to pay back this loan come by way of the $35 tax that's being levied on the airline tickets. So government's guarantee is not in order for government to have to pay. Government is simply providing the guarantee to give the reassurances to the banks that the government stands firm behind this project. It is not anticipated, Mr. Speaker, that based on the $35 that we're currently charging, the amounts that we've already accumulated, that the government would ever be called upon to have to pay for this loan. And I think that we should all be comforted and confidence given that in one of the worst crises that we've seen in our lifetime, which is this pandemic, that the lockbox system worked, that the resources were there to be able to continue to fund the project. And I think that this is very comforting to the syndicate of banks as well as to the government of Taiwan, who have graciously given us these loans at very concessional rates, both interest rates as well as the terms of the loan, in order for us to complete this significant project for St. Lucia. We do need, with the additional hotel rooms coming on, we genuinely do believe that tourism will rebound specifically to the Caribbean much quicker, and this is certainly going to help put St. Lucia in a much more favorable position competitively moving forward. So on that, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the support of our colleagues in Parliament in order to make this amendment so we can proceed and allow SLASPA to proceed to finalize this loan agreement. Thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament revokes the Finance Administration Act, resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister for Finance to guarantee borrowing by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited to finance the Hiranura International Airport Redevelopment Project, published as statutory instrument number 124 of 2019. Be it further resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of EC 202,500,000 for the purpose of financing the Hiranura International Airport Redevelopment Project by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the Bank of St. Lucia Limited as follows. A. Bank of St. Lucia Limited, EC 58,900,000. B. First National Bank of St. Lucia Limited, EC 54,500,000. C. Grenada Cooperative Bank Limited, EC 40,100,000. D. Antigua Commercial Bank Limited, EC 24,500,000. E. Eastern Caribbean Amalgamated Bank Limited, EC 24,500,000. Be it further resolved that A. The loan is repayable over a period of 20 years with a 60-month moratorium on the principal payments with interest paid only. B. The interest is payable quarterly from the date of the initial disbursement of the loan. 1. The rate of 5.5% per annum during the 60-month moratorium period. 2. At a rate of not exceeding 5% per annum at the expiry of the 60-month moratorium period and the commencement of blended payments including interest and principal. C. The blended interest rate will be provided semi-annually which will reflect the relative proportion of cash and government guarantee security provided, and the interest is payable at 1. 4.5% on the cash security provided, and 2. 5% on the government guarantee security provided. D. The blended payments including principal and interest to be paid monthly. E. A commitment fee of 0.75% is payable on the disbursement of the loan.
Speaker, I beg that we suspend the House for lunch for 1 hour.
Honorable members, the question is that the House will stand suspended for the next hour. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended.
The Honorable House has just been suspended for lunch. However, coming off of morning of debate over the motion for Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of $13 million from the CDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, consisting of a special funds resources portion in the amount of $10,800,000 and ordinary capital resources portion in the amount of $19,200,000 for the purpose of financing the implementation of policy reform initiatives designed to support St. Lucia's COVID-19 crisis response and achieving fiscal stability. With this combined $30 million loan from the CDB is to meet the budgetary shortfall given that government revenue has fallen by 60%. It is also to meet increased costs in the healthcare sector as a result of COVID-19. Also to be going towards supporting households at multiple levels that are affected by unemployment due to COVID-19, as well as micro and macro initiatives to build back the economy. And this motion, coming from this motion, we had contributions from the parliamentary representatives, the representative for Alabre, Honorable Alva Baptiste, Souffle François Jacques, Honorable Herod Stanislas, throwing his support behind the motion, and hearing from the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, who has forwarded this motion in the Honorable House, and getting approval ultimately. And just before we went to break, we saw the forwarding of the motion for Parliament to revoke the Finance Administration Act resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister for Finance to guarantee borrowing by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority from a syndicate of banks led by the St. Lucia Bank of St. Lucia Limited to finance the UNO International Airport Redevelopment Project, published as statutory instrument number 124 of 2019. This is already accommodated. My apologies. This is where the parliamentary proceedings stuck a pin in the day, and so they have suspended for lunch. And when they do return, we do expect continued contributions on this motion and discussions on the bills being tabled by the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance and the Minister for Tourism, Information and Broadcasting, Culture and the Creative Industries. There are 4 bills to be read later on in the proceedings today by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service. That is the Public Finance Management Bill and the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Amendment Bill. And these will be the first readings. The Public Finance Management Bill, it is not new, as it was presented in Parliament back in 2017, and since then it has been reviewed by both public and private sector stakeholders. This bill sets rules and processes that will direct government in mobilizing and spending funds. The bills to be tabled in the Honourable House by the Minister for Tourism, Information and Broadcasting, Culture and the Creative Industries, Honourable Dominic Fede. They are the St. Lucia Tourism Authority Amendment Bill and the Tourism Levy Bill, going through their first reading today. At this point in time, we now break and we take you back to studio until the resumption of the Honourable House proceedings, that is the sitting of the House of Assembly for today, Wednesday, November 11th, 2020. Do stay tuned to NTN.